personality is I want to win badly. I want to win more Lombardis for Philadelphia and our fans. We got the greatest fans around, and I will do everything possible.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It drops Mondays and Thursdays at 6 a.m. You get the latest Inside the Birds podcast tomorrow morning at 6. Geoff Mosher and Adam Kaplan breaking down all the latest Eagles draft news and off-season news as it happens. Geoff Mosher is with me here for today's edition of Football at 4. I always like hearing that from Jeffrey Lurie in the, coming in there, that he will do everything possible to continue to try to help this team win. But a lot of people, Jeff, feel that he is what is preventing this team from win. Like, I it's weird. Like this, we talked a little Monday, and I thought about it more, and I'm like, how did it get to this point where Lurie was kind of like a persona non grata? He was like just like the happy-go-lucky owner guy who was up there, and now it's like a totally different perception. Now, you've been around this team for a long time, covered a lot of different incarnations of Eagles. Andy, were you around for Ray at all?
No, I was not around for Ray.
So Andy, Chip, Doug, now Nick. At any point when you were covering the team, did you say, that owner's a problem?
No, actually, I did not ever feel he was a problem because now knowing that no owner is perfect, right, and that everybody has flaws, I never heard anything other about Jeffrey that would lead me to think that he is interfering in a way that was starting to control the trajectory of the franchise. He was always described during the Andy Reid era as an involved owner who does take a lot of notes and who does have his finger on the pulse of what goes on, but he's always been very caring for his players, caring for his coaches, willing to spend money, willing to upgrade facilities, and obviously a forward thinker. You did always know that Jeffrey Lurie was going to be more involved in as far as being present, right? In fact, I heard some strange stories. I like, him being. I think there was a time where there was a draft where, he had been divorced from Christina Lurie, and she was still a part of the franchise. I think she still is in some capacity, right? And that she's in the war room, he's in the war room, and his new wife, I believe, was also the wife he has now is in the war room. And maybe for some, that was kind of a little bit of a weird dynamic.
Now, that's more dysfunction than anything else I've heard with the Eagles so far.
Well, remember, she works for the franchise and had a very high title, I believe, in the business or the charities. I forget. I apologize for not remembering. But something like that doesn't make you think that my gosh, the franchise is in terrible hands or there's something crazy going on. It was just kind of different.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people look at dysfunction. We touched on it the other day, and I thought it was an interesting conversation, this dynamic between the analytics departments and the scouting departments. And, I feel like a lot of teams kind of go through this. But my question is, we asked about this Alec Halaby, and, how long ago or how much have you heard about him and what kind of insight and what kind of, when you saw the story from the other come out, were you kind of like, that's interesting? Or were you like, I've already known that Alec has had a hand in, decisions that this team has made?
Well, I think what the story said, Mike, was that, and I'll reaffirm similarly what I know is that people suspect that his voice carries a lot more weight than they feel it should. He's certainly, people understand that analytics is important to the franchise. It's important to Howie and Jeff. And of course, you're going to have an analytics staff and someone has to lead that. And there's a role there. But when you're kind of perceived as Howie's guy, which is something I've heard for quite a while, or Jeffrey Lurie's guy, and you're in a different department of the building, there's a fear or a concern, I should say, not fear, a concern that the owner might or the GM might gravitate toward Alec Halaby's position on something more so than weighing it as 1/3, 1/4, 1/5 of the conversation. You know, like that's the guy whose ultimate say is going to have more say than me because the owner likes him or likes the process of what he does more than per se the process of what I do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm getting at, is that for a long, long time, I have heard that there are people in the building in different departments, whether it's coaching or scouting, that feel scouting. When I say scouting, I mean personnel, right? That feel like what he does takes too much precedence over what they do. That's their feeling on it.
Right. So essentially you have, like, let's say in the past you would have Peterson, Roseman, Lurie, and they're 33, 33, 33. You're saying Halby is the guy that comes in and kind of has the ear and says, we're going to go in this direction.
Well, let's kind of set the stage, right? You have your draft meetings that take place for weeks and weeks and weeks before the actual draft, right? And you're evaluating players and you're going through scenarios. And when you're in player evaluation, it involves the scouting staff, the coaching staff, the GM, the owner has probably been involved, and then your analytics staff. And so when you're haggling it out there and trying to set your board and do your rankings, right? And someone, say, hypothetically from the scouting staff says, I don't think this guy is really what we're looking for. He's a good player, but he can only do X and Y. And then someone from the analytics staff, in this case, Alec Halby, says, oh no, we've ran the numbers and we've researched it. We've watched the tape and cross-referenced it. And we think that he is absolutely the type of guy. Well, then you have an issue. Well, then you have an argument, which every team has, a debate, but does the analytics guy win every single time? Or does he win in critical junctures? And then we go back to kind of like the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside pick there, where that was clearly more of an analytics department preference than, say, scouting or coaching, right?
Right. I mean, it seems that, like, there's so many mixed messages here where you hear these stories, well, the scouts wanted one guy and, the other side wanted this guy. And when in the end, it's Jeffrey Lurie. Remember when was it when there was this press conference and they said, who has say in the draft? We all do. Well, who breaks the tie? And Jeffrey Lurie is like, I do. And everybody laughed. They thought it was a joke, right? They thought like, Jeffrey Lurie's got no. But it turns out that, like, that's the actual, like, hey, Jeffrey Lurie does have on the when these two guys can't break a tie, Jeff Lurie comes in and breaks the tie. Like, so to me, like, that to me is more of the problem. And the analytics, again, I don't think this is just an Eagles problem, though. I feel like this is a problem everywhere. No?
I wouldn't say it's I think some teams do a good job of at least balancing harmoniously the departments, or they emphasize, like, for example, I know of a franchise that I'm not going to mention their name, but that believes in analytics, but they don't believe in using analytics to draft players. That when you talk analytics in football with this franchise, their concept of it is, all right, it's fourth down in this part of the field. Like, do I go for it? Do I not go for it? Do I go for two after the touchdown or not? Based on the score, based on, what we're at. Okay. They've told me that they don't necessarily use analytics heavily in their draft process. The Eagles obviously do. So that's just two ways of looking at it and doing it differently. Joe Banner, Mike, who brought analytics to the Eagles, when he started with a few guys from MIT after Jeffrey brought the team, has told Adam and I on the Inside the Birds platforms many times that he also believes that you should not rely heavily on analytics. They didn't in the draft. Okay. So clearly somewhere along the line that has changed, where it now is a big part of what they do in the draft. So yes, some teams do have a difficult marriage between these staffs because they're people who represent two distinctly different sides of looking at a player. But some teams, I think, balance it much better than the Eagles do.
Yeah, I know that people are posting questions too. If you want a question for Jeff for Football at 4, let's get a couple questions. I got a couple other things I want to hit on, but Jalen wants to know if Jalen Phillips falls to the back end of the first round due to medical concerns, should the Eagles try to move up to take a chance on his upside? It kind of ties into a question that I wanted to get your opinion on about, could the Eagles have another draft day trade in the works here? Do we see the Eagles? Do we feel strongly that they can make a second pick in the first round this year?
Yeah, I think that anything is on the table, Mike. Adam and I have talked about, don't think that they're just definitely going to sit at 12 and make a pick. They could move up, maybe up to 9. perhaps to get a player that they want, because that's ahead of Dallas. They could move down, perhaps, if they're at 12 and there's a quarterback still on the board. Could they try to trade up into the back of the first round? It would make sense if there's a player like Jalen Phillips that you bring up here that they really like, because they have 11 picks. And to me, it's very doubtful that they're going to make 11 picks.
Right.
You want to use that for flexibility. I don't know if Jalen Phillips would be the guy that they would target, but I think common sense says when teams move back into the first round, it's usually for a quarterback or a premier pass rusher. So Jalen Phillips is considered one of the better pass rushers in the draft. So I think your radar could be up for a move like that. But clearly the medicals would have to, as the person who asked the question, would have to really, really play into that.
Now, the kid from Penn State, Owe, if he started to drop in the back end of the first round, is that a guy that you trade back into the first round to try? Like, are there certain players that you think the Eagles would target if they're in the 24, 25, 26 range, that they would want to go from 37 because that guy's falling?
It's possible. A pass rusher is definitely a position that they like to capitalize on in the first round, and that they'd be willing to. When you've looked at their trades, they have traded up in the first round for pass rushers before. So they've done it with Brandon Graham. And so I definitely think that that's an area you would keep your eye out. Owe is a very raw kid who has unbelievable athleticism. And, all you have to do is watch Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell on our Inside the Birds platforms, because he raved about the kid's athletic ability. Now, the fact that he hasn't played a ton of football and he had 0 sacks and he's just kind of coming into his own and is raw means you need some time to develop him. I don't know how many teams are going to be willing to give up a first-round pick for someone that they feel they have to develop a lot, but I think this kid is probably going to wind up going back end of the first round.
Right. And Joe Show asked, do you think there's any way the Eagles could trade for another first rounder? So we have 2 this draft. Maybe the Eagles can get Smith and Surtain. My question, kind of off of Joe's, would be, you're talking about pass rusher. They're at 12. You don't take the pass rusher at 12, but how about moving back to 15 where that Patriots pick is and saying, you know what, we'll get another asset and we'll get the pass rusher? Because I kind of agree with what you're saying. The blueprint for them has been to get pass rushers early in the draft.
Mm-hmm. I don't think they're going to want to move down unless it's that scenario where every single guy they've coveted is gone before them. I think they're more likely to move up to get a guy like Patrick Surtain, perhaps J.C. Horn, than they are to move back. I think if they move back, it's because they probably couldn't move up, couldn't get a deal done. And then one by one, all the names that you would commonly associate with the Eagles at that point, Horn, Surtain, Waddle, perhaps one of the offensive linemen, Slater and Sewell, are all off the board. And at that point, it's like Micah Parsons, and you know that the Eagles aren't going to take Micah Parsons, so they move back. And by the way, there was a commenter on Monday, right? We did this show on Monday on our YouTube channel. It said Mosher's always pushing for the Eagles to take Micah Parsons. And sometimes, Mike, I wonder again, if people actually listen to you and I talk, how many times have I said the Eagles will not take? I mean, you guys have been asking me for that for almost 2 months. And I said that they will never take a linebacker or Micah Parsons in the first round. So right. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, I agree. You have not said, I don't believe, one time that Parsons is even in play with the 6th pick, essentially, and then now even at the 12th pick. You don't feel that's the case. I want to get some couple quick thoughts now that Howard and Wilson have both spoken. And the message, like, these guys get these 1-year deals, kind of low-risk signings. Both guys, well, at least Wilson should get a lot of playing time. But what do you like about these 1-year veteran deals that that help this team out, but also help them move on?
What I like about them, Mike, is that they give you so much flexibility. When you sign guys to a 1-year deal, you haven't made a long-term investment in them, and they also know they're on a prove-it deal, so they've got to play their rear ends off if they want to continue to have a career. But then they also are of the understanding that this team is not committed to them for the long term, and if the team drafts somebody better at that position, they don't have any right to complain about it. They're not they're not any, they're actually trying to make the team. I mean, Jordan Howard is not guaranteed to make the 53, depending on what the Eagles do in the draft or the rest of free agency and what they have at running back. Eric Wilson probably more so because he knows the defense and they need him, and they're not, blessed at linebacker. But if they happen to hit on a second round pick, right? Let's say they use their second round pick on a linebacker, on a Nick Bolton or somebody like that. And this kid's really good. And Alex Singleton's really developed. Well, you know what? Then you play who's playing well. You don't feel committed to have to play guys because you paid them X amount of dollars.
Let me ask you this. I'm glad you brought this up because a lot of people like Bolton in round 2. He's more of your Mike middle linebacker, run stuffer. Wilson is more of a defender, in pass coverage.
Right.
Singleton's kind of like, he's just kind of a blue collar, does everything. He's not great at anything. But how will the linebackers in this defense be different than the way Schwartz used them?
Well, it's my understanding, as we've talked about, we know they're going to play a lot of the Zimmer system, right? And Zimmer does a lot of cover 2, but he also does a lot of cover 3. It looks like cover 2, but then as we all remember from the Tampa 2 defenses back when they were winning, that middle linebacker is a coverage guy more so than a thumper. It's the outside linebacker, Derek Brooks, in that defense who was the thumper, right? So your middle linebacker kind of drops back and covers that middle of the field while your split safeties cover their thirds of the field. So you make a cover 3 look. So that's why I expect from Eric Wilson to be more of a coverage guy and play that, be able to carry that deep middle, which is not something the Eagles have had for quite a while now, maybe since Jordan Hicks. I don't know. They never even played that style of defense, right? You wouldn't want TJ Edwards dropping all the way back. You wouldn't want Alex Singleton doing that. You probably would want Davion Taylor to be able to do that. However, he's a very raw prospect who needs a lot of development. So Eric Wilson can play that, and Singleton can play that kind of outside linebacker role that is more of a tackler, which is more of what he's good at than coverage.
Yeah, I was going to say, so if you're watching the Eagles defense and like linebacker play, you should anticipate that they have a little bit more on their plate, or they put more importance on that position in this style of defense than what Jim Schwartz did. Is that Jim Schwartz by design, or was it because he didn't have talent?
Well, it's a little, yes and no. I think Jim certainly put more emphasis on the front 4. However, Jim wanted a linebacker last year. He really wanted a real linebacker last year, and all he got was a guy in the 3rd round who most teams had as a 5th, 6th, 7th, or undrafted free agent. So he didn't really get what he wanted as far as a talent level linebacker. But he was here when the team had Jordan Hicks, right? And he was here when the team had Nigel Bradham, who played at a fairly high level for a couple of years there. So I agree with you, though. When you look at the Mike Zimmer system, you also see a lot of linebacker blitzes. And I imagine if Gannon wants to do that, he's going to have to feel comfortable that he has the right type of players for that. Singleton has a good nose for getting to the football, and I thought he blitzed well last year. So maybe that's one of the 2 guys that he'd feel comfortable with.
Well, Wilson had 3
quarterback with. I don't know if he has anybody else that he's comfortable in that.
Yeah, Wilson had 3 sacks.
Yeah, that's true. Wilson. Yeah, but Wilson was put into a role. He really was a backup who was forced into that role when Eric Kendricks got hurt. I think you'd like a little bit more tenacity. Wilson may have had 3 sacks. It doesn't mean he might have been in the right place at the right time. More so than he's a great pressure creator.
All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Eagles, tomorrow we will be just 2 weeks away from the NFL draft. I'm going to miss it. There's so much going on here. 12, there's a lot of players in play. The Eagles have a lot of holes. This is what a bad team does. It makes the draft very interesting. This one's very interesting. And then, of course, what's next? The mini camp stuff, this voluntary camp, a lot of teams are backing out. What do we see happening next?
That's a great question. I know that there was an announcement today from the NFLPA and the NFL on what the template of the phase 1, 2, and 3 will look like, and looks like a lot of virtual meetings early on, and not until I think May 17th do you actually get on-field type of work, and we'll have to see by then if these teams that are sort of having their players say we're not coming if anything changes. But it does look like right now that a lot of veteran players especially have convinced for the greater good that players are going to exercise their right to be voluntary and not show up at any in-person on-field activities, but things can change as they always do in the NFL. We'll see.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. So get the latest edition. It comes out tomorrow morning at 6. Andrew's here to talk more draft tomorrow. Adam on Friday. Jeff is back on Monday. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk on the hotline. Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds. Take care, man.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it.
He is back on Monday's show, as we said.